I have told this story maybe 4 times in my life, and never to anyone who believed all of it. I am telling it now because I am old, and because the people who could punish me for telling it are dust, and because I think somebody should write down the truth before the official version is the only one left. My name is Quinn Sarath. When this happened, I was 19 of our years old, which is young even for us. I was a third-tier sensor adept aboard the Dominion battle cruiser Unbending Tide. That is a small job on a very big ship. My whole world was a curved black panel and the soft blue light of contacts crossing it. I read the dark for a living. I was good at it. I thought that meant I understood it. I did not understand anything yet. Let me tell you about the Dominion first, so you know what kind of people we were. So you know why what happened happened. We were old. That is the simplest way to say it. The Vashtar Dominion had held its stars for 9,000 years before I was born. We had 100 client species. We had a war doctrine so refined that we had a word for it that doesn't translate cleanly. It meant something like the correct distance. We fought from far away. Always. We had learned over centuries of blood that the side which controlled range controlled the outcome. So we built ships that struck from beyond the horizon and never, ever closed. It worked. For 9,000 years it worked. When you win for 9,000 years, you stop calling it winning. You start calling it the way things are. The day I am telling you about, we were not even at war, not properly. We were doing what the Dominion called a clearance. There was a cluster of 3 systems on our spinward edge that had filed for protection, then changed their minds, then started trading with somebody we hadn't approved. That somebody was a species we had files on but had never bothered to take seriously. Bipeds. Soft. Short-lived. From a single blue world out past the dust lanes. You know who I mean. You've guessed already. We didn't even have a proper name for them in the fleet. The clerks called them the recents because they'd only shown up in our records a few generations back. The deck officers called them something cruder that I won't repeat. They were a footnote, a trade irritation. The kind of thing the Dominion handled by sending 1 cruiser and a clearance order, and letting the reputation do the rest. So that's what we were. 1 cruiser, the Unbending Tide, 40,000 crew, weapons that could crack a moon if you gave them an afternoon, and an escort wing of 9 strike cutters because the Admiralty liked roundish numbers and didn't want to look lazy. We arrived at the edge of the middle system expecting nothing. A convoy of refugee haulers maybe, some of the recents pulling out their colonists before we arrived because everyone always pulled out before we arrived. That was the whole point of being us. You didn't fight the Dominion. You left or you knelt. Those were the moves. There were only 2 moves. I remember the bridge that morning was bored. I want you to understand that. Bored. The tactical prime, an old Vashtar named HFY, was eating dried fruit at his station. The captain wasn't even on the bridge. There was music playing, low, some long crystalline thing from the homeworld. Somebody was complaining about the temperature of the air. We dropped out of the deep lanes into normal space, and the sky filled with the soft static of a new system, and I leaned into my panel to do my job, which was to read the dark and tell my superiors what was in it. And the first thing I saw was the convoy, right where it should be. 11 civilian haulers, fat and slow, full of people, running for the far jump point like everyone always ran. Good, expected. I logged them. The second thing I saw was a single contact between us and the convoy. 1 ship, alone, not running. Holding position. I almost didn't report it. I want to be honest with you about that because that's where this story really starts. I almost didn't say anything because it was so small. On my panel it was a speck. Our cruiser's mass signature was a sun next to it. The thing was maybe a 400th of our tonnage. Old reactor signature, leaky. The kind of dirty burn we'd retired from our own fleet 2,000 years ago. It had patch welds on its hull that showed up as little scars on my readout. It looked on my panel like something that had been through a great deal and lost most of those arguments. It looked like junk, but it was sitting exactly between us and the people we'd come to clear. So I keyed my channel and I said, as flatly as I could so the senior adepts wouldn't laugh at me, Sensor 3, I have one contact holding station ahead of the convoy. Small, recent make. It isn't moving. HFY, the tactical prime, didn't even turn his head. He just said, isn't moving where? Isn't moving anywhere, I said. It's holding between us and them. There was a little pause on the bridge, and then somebody laughed. I never found out who. And Vorlon popped another piece of dried fruit into his mouth and said the words I have heard in my sleep for the rest of my life. He said, then log it and ignore it. One of theirs lost its nerve. It'll burn when we get there. And he turned the music back up. I want to tell you what we knew about the recents, the humans, on that morning, because it explains everything that came after, not the truth about them, what we thought we knew, the file version. We knew they were short-lived, 80 of their years, give or take, against our 400. We had decided this made them frantic and shallow. A species that dies that fast, we reasoned, cannot plan, cannot hold an institution together, cannot build anything that lasts. They were sprinters, we said, in a galaxy that rewards distance runners. We knew they came from one world, a single, hot, wet, violent planet. We had survey footage. Their homeworld had storms that could level cities. It had things in its oceans the size of our shuttles. It had a history, the little of it we'd bothered to read, that was almost entirely war. We looked at that and we felt sorry for them. Imagine, we said, being made by a place that cruel. Imagine what it does to a mind, growing up somewhere that's always trying to kill you. We thought it made them broken, twitchy. We thought of them the way you think of an animal that's been beaten too much, dangerous in small ways, but easy to manage if you don't get close. And here is the thing none of us understood. Not me, not Vorlon, not the captain, not the Admiralty 9,000 years deep in its own certainty. We had the data exactly right, and the conclusion exactly wrong. A species made by a world that is always trying to kill you does not become broken. It becomes the thing the world couldn't kill. Every single one of them, walking around, was the descendant of an unbroken line of survivors going back to the first cell that decided not to quit. They didn't fear death the way we did, because death had been at the door their whole evolutionary lives and they had spent 4 billion years slamming it. We thought their short lives made them weak. It made them faster to commit. It made them able to spend a thing, the most precious thing, the only thing, without 100 years of hesitation first. We just didn't have the word for it yet. The word in their language is resolve. We learned it that day. We learned it the hard way, which is the only way our people have ever learned anything. We ran our approach the way we ran everything. Slowly, correctly, from the correct distance. The convoy kept fleeing. Good. The escort cutters spread into the standard clearance fan. The big guns on the unbending tide woke up one at a time, and I felt each one through the deck as a low cough in the ship's bones. We were not in a hurry. We were never in a hurry. Hurry was for species that might lose. I kept my eyes on the small contact, the junk ship sitting there. It had not moved. That bothered me. I couldn't have told you why then. I can tell you now. Everything I had ever read on my panel, every contact in 3 years of reading the dark had behaved according to one of the two moves: leave or kneel, run or transmit surrender. When a small thing saw a large thing coming, it did one of those two. Always. This thing did neither. It just held, and I noticed watching it that it had turned, slightly. Its dirty old reactor plume had swung a few degrees. It was keeping its nose pointed at us. Not running. Aiming. Sensor 3, I said again, and I could hear my own voice was higher than I wanted. The contact has reoriented. It's facing us. Bow on. This time Vorlon did turn his head, not because he was worried, because he was amused. Bow on, he repeated, like it was a joke I'd told. Adept, do you know what bow on means? It means it wants to use its forward weapons. A ship that size against us presenting its nose means it has decided to fight. He said the word the way you'd say a child had decided to fight the tide. Note the time. We will want to remember the exact moment. One of the recents lost its mind. The bridge laughed again, louder this time. I laughed too. I am ashamed of that, but I won't hide it. I laughed too because everyone was laughing and I was 19 and I wanted to belong to the room. Then the small contact transmitted. Now I have to explain something about transmissions, because this is where the morning broke in half. When a ship hails you, our protocol logs it, translates it, and pushes the text to every relevant station. Threats, surrenders, distress, all of it routed through the linguistics core and dropped clean onto our panels. I had read 1,000 of them. They were always the same few flavors. Mercy, terms, stand down, we yield. The text from the junk ship came up on my panel, translated, and the linguistics core had flagged it with a little uncertainty marker, because the phrasing didn't match any of its surrender templates. It read, "This is the Sersha, escort of the Brennan convoy. You will not pass us. Turn around." I read it twice. I read it a third time. "You will not pass us." I sat in my little chair in the soft blue light, 19 years old, and I felt the first cold finger of something I didn't have a name for go down my spine. Because that wasn't a threat. A threat says or else. A threat tells you what happens if you don't comply, because a threat is still trying to make a deal. This wasn't trying to make a deal. It wasn't a surrender either, obviously. It was just a fact. The way you'd tell someone a wall was load-bearing. You will not pass us. Turn around. Not a request. Not a bargain. A description of how the next few hours were going to go, delivered by a 400th of our mass. I pushed it up the chain. I watched Vorlon read it. I watched the amusement on his ridged old face change just slightly into something more like irritation. He didn't understand it either, but where I felt cold, he felt insulted. "It's bluffing," he said. "It's buying time for the convoy, clever for a recent." He turned to the weapons board. "Lance battery 2, target the escort, 1 round. Let's puncture the bluff and get on with the morning." I want to be precise here, because the official record lies about this part. The official record says the Sersha fired first. It did not. We fired first. We always fired first. That was doctrine. The correct distance, the first strike, the puncture. We fired first and we were proud of it. Lance Battery 2 of the Unbending Tide fired 1 round at the junk ship. It should have ended there. Understand that. A lance round from a Dominion battle cruiser at that range against a hull that size was not a fight. It was an erasure. I had seen those rounds open colony domes like soft fruit. The targeting solution was perfect. The math was perfect. Our math was always perfect. And I watched, on my panel, the little blue speck of the Sersha do something that the math did not allow. It moved. I need you to understand why that one word moved was the beginning of the panic. Not the fighting, not the dying. That came later. The panic, the real thing that broke 9,000 years of certainty, started with the fact that the junk ship moved when our round was already in flight. Our lances travel fast, faster than thought by the standards of anything with a body. The whole basis of the correct distance was that by the time you saw the round coming, the round had already arrived. Nothing dodged a lance. It wasn't a matter of skill. It was a matter of physics. You could not perceive and react inside that window. No nervous system in the catalogued galaxy was fast enough. The Sersha didn't dodge the round. The Sersha had started its burn before we fired. I went back through my own recordings that night, over and over, until a senior adept made me stop. And what I found was this. In the half-second after Vorlon gave the firing order, before the lance even discharged, in the tiny gap between the order and the shot, the junk ship's dirty old reactor had spiked. They had read the order. Not the words. They couldn't hear Vorlon. They had read us. Our battery cycling up. The pre-fire signature we never bothered to hide because we'd never in 9,000 years met anyone who'd use it. They saw us decide to shoot. And in that half-second, that frantic, short-lived, twitchy half-second we had laughed at, they had already chosen which way to fall. The round missed by the width of a hull. It missed because they were a species made by a world that throws things at you. And the thing your world teaches you, before it teaches you anything else, is to watch the hands. We had been so busy being far away and correct that we had forgotten the oldest skill in the universe, the one their whole planet had drilled into them across 1 billion screaming years. Watch the hands, move before the throw. Vorlon stared at his board. The amusement was gone now, all of it. Again, he said, his voice was flat. All forward batteries, solution on the escort now. And the Sersha, the junk ship, the footnote, the speck, lit its main drive, pointed its scarred old nose directly at the unbending tide, and began to close the distance. It was coming straight at us. Toward the guns, toward the cruiser 100 times its size, toward the certain mathematical 9,000-year-old death. It was not running. It had never been running. It was charging. The bridge went quiet, not calm quiet, the other kind. The kind where 40 people realize at the same moment that the script they've been reading from their whole lives has a page missing. Because there was no doctrine for this. I mean that literally. Our entire art of war was built on one assumption so deep that nobody had ever written it down, because you don't write down water if you're a fish. The enemy wants to live. Every maneuver, every range table, every clever feint we'd ever devised assumed an opponent who, like us, would always, at the bottom of everything, choose to survive. Break their will, threaten their existence, present overwhelming force, and they leave or they kneel. 2 moves. Always 2 moves. The Sersha had found a third move. The third move was no. The third move was a 400th of our mass, leaking reactor coolant from a dozen patch welds, 11 civilian haulers full of children running for the jump point behind it, pointing its nose at the largest thing in the system and saying, with its engines instead of its words now, "You will not pass us, and I do not care what that costs me." I heard HFY, tactical prime of the unbending tide, 9,000 years of doctrine sitting on his shoulders, say something very quietly to himself. The bridge mic caught it. It's in my private recording, the one I never turned in. He said, "It's not stopping." He said it the way you'd say it about something that had broken a law of nature in front of you, because to him it had. And from somewhere behind me, a junior officer, younger even than me, I think, said the thing out loud that all 40 of us were thinking and didn't have the rank to say. He said, "Sir, that can't be a warship. Look at it. It's a hauler hull. That's a converted civilian ship. That can't be a human warship." And then, softer, the part that became the whole story, the part I still hear. "Is it even possible?" The captain came onto the bridge during the charge. I remember the doors opening because the bridge of the unbending tide had a sound when it sealed and unsealed, a low double note, and in all the quiet that note landed like a dropped plate. Everyone heard it. Nobody turned around. We were all watching the small blue speck on the main display grow slowly into a slightly less small blue speck, which doesn't sound like much, except that on a Dominion bridge a contact getting closer instead of further was a thing most of us had only ever seen in training simulations of disasters that never actually happened. Captain Daimon Reth was 412 years old. I want you to hold that number for a second. He had been a serving officer longer than the entire recorded history of the species we were fighting. He had fought in the Morning War and the Sediment Campaign and the long, quiet strangling of the Oru Reach, and he had never, not once in 4 centuries, lost a ship. Not a cutter, not a tender, nothing. He was the most decorated commander in the Spinward Fleet, and he walked onto his own bridge that morning with a cup of something warm still in his hand, because he had been told it was a clearance, and clearances did not require you to put down your drink. He looked at the display. He looked at the charging junk ship. He looked at Vorlon, who had gone the gray undercolor we go when the blood pulls inward. And the captain said, with the particular patience of a very old man addressing a problem he assumes is simple, "Why is it getting closer?" Nobody answered, because the honest answer was we don't know, and nobody had said we don't know on that bridge in a very long time. Reth set his cup down. I heard it touch the rail, such a small sound. He'd remember setting it down, I think, for the rest of his life, the way I remember everything from that morning, too sharp, too lit, every detail standing up off the background like it had been cut out with a blade. That's what fear does to memory. It turns up the contrast on everything. I learned that from the humans too later, though I didn't know it yet. "Tactical Prime," the captain said. "Report." Vorlon's voice had lost all its dried fruit ease. "One escort, recent make, converted civilian hull. It has refused clearance, evaded our opening round, and is now closing on an intercept line. It is, and here the old tactician actually paused, because the next word didn't fit in his mouth. "It is attacking us, sir." The captain almost smiled. I saw it. The corner of his face moved toward the expression we make for things that are absurd. "Attacking us," he repeated. "With what?" That was a fair question. We'd scanned it. I'd scanned it myself 3 times because I couldn't believe the returns. The Sersha carried 2 forward mass drivers of a make we'd retired before the recents had agriculture. It had point defense that wouldn't scratch our shielding. It had no lance, no spinal weapon, no torpedo bays we could find. Against the unbending tide it was, in raw terms, a child running at a wall with a rock in each hand. "With everything it has, sir," Vorlon said quietly, "which is nothing. The math is absurd. There is no firing solution it possesses that threatens this ship." "Then why?" said Captain Reth. And now the not smile was gone, because 400 years had taught him to be afraid of exactly the things that made no sense. "Is it still coming?" And nobody answered him, because the answer was the third move, and none of us had a word for the third move yet. Let me back up. I have to tell you about the briefing, the one they gave us before the clearance, because it is the funniest and the most terrible part, and you have to understand how completely, how thoroughly, how expensively wrong we were. 2 days out, the intelligence adept had assembled the senior crew and the relevant juniors. I was relevant barely as a censor hand, and given us the file on the recents, the humans. I sat in the back and ate nothing, and listened to the most catastrophic piece of analysis ever delivered with full confidence in the history of our people. It went like this. The recents, the adept said, were a low-priority species of negligible military concern. He put their homeworld up on the display. He walked us through it almost gently, the way you'd present a sad case. Single planet, no off-world industry of significance. A history of, he counted, at least 15,000 recorded conflicts in a span our own species would consider a single uninterrupted afternoon. "Observe," he said, "the instability. A species at war with itself this continuously cannot organize. It cannot sustain. It exhausts itself." He showed us their wars. He meant it as proof of weakness. We watched footage of human conflicts, old, grainy, pulled from intercepted broadcasts, and the senior officers murmured to each other about how chaotic it was, how wasteful, all that effort, all that dying over rocks and lines and ideas. We felt very superior. We had not had a civil war in 6,000 years. We were so stable, so correct. What none of us was old enough or humble enough to ask was the obvious question. The question I would have given my own rank to have asked out loud in that room. If they fight that much, and that hard, and they're still here, what does that make the ones who survived? We saw 15,000 wars and concluded, weak, divided, exhausted. The correct conclusion was, 15,000 wars and they are still here. Every human alive was the end of an unbroken chain of people who had looked at something stronger than them and not run. Their whole species was a filter, and the thing the filter selected for, over and over, across every one of those 15,000 catastrophes, was the one trait we had no defense against because we had bred it out of ourselves in 6,000 years of peace. They did not break. You could not make them leave, and you could not make them kneel, because for 4 billion years their entire planet had been trying to do exactly that, with teeth and ice and fire and each other. And the ones who left and the ones who knelt had all died, and the ones who stayed and fought were the ones who had children. We had selected for correctness. They had selected for no. And the intelligence adept closed his file with the line they actually put in the official summary, the line I have never forgotten, the line that should be carved on the wreck of the unbending tide wherever it drifts now. Recommend minimal force. The recents present no scenario in which they choose to fight a superior opponent. He was right about the superior opponent part. He just had the wrong species in that chair. Back to the charge. The Sersha crossed into our medium envelope, and Vorlon did the correct thing, the doctrine thing, the thing 9,000 years said you did to a closing target. He didn't fire the big lances, too slow to recycle, too much overkill, and the captain hadn't authorized full discharge on a clearance. He brought up the cutter wing. Escort wing, Vorlon said. 3 flights. Englobe and dispatch the escort, keep it off our hull, this ends now. 9 strike cutters peeled off the unbending tide and went out to kill the junk ship. And I want to be fair to our people here, because this is the part where some tellers of this story make us sound stupid, and we were not stupid. We were the second best warfighters in the catalogued galaxy that morning. The cutter wing executed a flawless englobement. 3 flights of 3, spreading to box the Sersha from 9 angles at once, the classic Vashyar net, the thing we'd use to crush 100 braver foes than this. From 9 sides at once, no escape vector, perfect geometry. I had watched simulations of it close around targets like a fist. It always worked. It always worked because the target always tried to get out of the net. The Sersha did not try to get out of the net. The Sersha picked one cutter, the lead of the upper flight, a ship called the Vels Ascent, crewed by people I'd eaten in the same mess hall as the week before, and it went straight at it. It abandoned every other vector. It ignored the 8 other guns now lining up on its flanks. It chose one enemy, and it threw its entire self at that one enemy with a focus that, on my panel, looked less like a maneuver and more like a decision being made physical. The Vels Ascent did the natural thing, the trained thing, the thing every one of us would have done. It tried to maintain the correct distance. It started to peel back, to keep the range open, to let the net do the killing. And the Sersha matched it, burn for burn, closer, closer, eating the distance the cutter was trying to keep, refusing to let the cutter have the one thing our entire civilization was built around: room. I heard the Vels Ascent's pilot on the open channel. I'll never forget it. She wasn't panicked. Not yet. She was confused. She said, "It won't let me open the range. It's staying inside my arc. Why is it staying inside my arc? It's giving up its own." And then the Sersha did the thing that I have spent 40 years trying to describe and have never gotten right. So I will just tell you what my panel showed and let you feel it the way I felt it. At the last possible instant, with the cutter's full battery about to bear, the Sersha cut its main drive and fired its maneuvering thrusters all on one side. A thing you are absolutely not supposed to do. A thing that puts forces through a hull that hulls are not built to take, and it slid. It pivoted around its own center of mass while still hurtling forward, like a thrown blade turning in the air, and it put its 2 ancient retired mass drivers exactly, on the one seam where a Vashyar cutter's forward shielding meets its drive housing. The single bad spot. The one weld in our own design that we had known about for 2,000 years and never bothered to fix because no one ever got close enough to exploit it. No one ever got close enough. The Sersha got close enough. It fired both drivers into that seam at a range so short it was practically a contact shot, and the Vel's ascent, a Dominion strike cutter, a thing that had never been lost, crewed by people I knew, came apart. I watched it on my panel as a contact that became two contacts, that became a spreading cloud of small ones. And the bridge of the unbending tide made a sound I had never heard it make before. It made the sound of a room full of immortals discovering, all at once, that they could die. After that, the morning stopped being a clearance and became something none of us had a word for. The remaining 8 cutters didn't englobe anymore. They scattered. Not on orders, Vorlon was screaming orders. Good orders, hold formation, maintain net. Do not let it isolate you. But underneath the orders something older was happening. Something that hadn't happened to our people in living memory. The pilots, those calm, correct, 4 times decorated pilots, were beginning to fly the way you fly when part of you has decided you might not be coming home. They kept trying to open the range, every single one. It was the only thing they knew, the correct distance, and the Sersha, one ship leaking, scarred, alone, kept refusing to let them have it. It would pick one, charge it, force it to react, and in the half-second of the reaction it would slide and find the seam and hammer that one bad weld with weapons we had laughed at, and another contact would become a cloud. It didn't win every pass. I want that on the record too, because the official version erases it and the legend version forgets it. The Sersha was hit. Many times. I watched its hull integrity bleed down on my panel, weld by weld, the patch jobs failing, the leaking reactor leaking worse, whole sections going dark. By the 4th cutter it was barely a ship anymore. It was a wound with engines. It was running on something that wasn't fuel and wasn't shielding, and wasn't anything my instruments could name. I know now what it was running on. It took me 40 years to be able to say it without my voice doing something I don't like. It was running on the 11 haulers behind it. Every hauler was full of people, the Brennan convoy, the colonists of those 3 little systems that had filed for protection and then changed their minds and then traded with the wrong friends. Children mostly, the way refugee convoys always are, they send the children first. And the Sersha was not a warship. The frightened young officer on our bridge had been right. That was the horror of it. It was a converted hauler. It was somebody's freight runner with 2 retired guns bolted to its nose, and a crew of, we found out later, 19. 19 people against 40,000. They were not soldiers, most of them. The captain of the Sersha had been, before this, a cargo master. The pilot who slid that hull around like a thrown blade had been a racing pilot, the human equivalent, somebody who flew for sport on the weekends. They were dock workers and mechanics and one schoolteacher. They had taken the only ship that could be spared, because all the other ships were full of children running for the jump point, and they had put themselves between those children and us, and they had decided 19 ordinary people, none of them old, all of them mortal, all of them with 80 short years they were choosing to spend all at once, that you will not pass us. Turn around. That was the math we hadn't done. That was the variable that wasn't in the file. We had calculated their weapons and their tonnage and their reactor output and their hull integrity, every number perfectly, and we had left out the only number that mattered, because we didn't have an instrument that could read it. How much is a person willing to lose? The answer for 19 humans that morning was everything, cheerfully, all at once, without 100 years of hesitation first. And there was no doctrine for it. There has never been a doctrine for it. You cannot englobe it. You cannot outrange it. You cannot threaten it, because threats are bargains and it has stopped bargaining. The only defense against no is to not be the thing it's saying no to, and we were that thing. We had flown 9 cutters and a battle cruiser straight into being exactly that thing. The captain understood before the rest of us. 400 years, he understood. I watched him watch the 4th cutter become a cloud, and I watched the color come back into his face, not because he was less afraid, but because he had passed through the part of fear where you flail and come out the other side into the cold, clear place where you simply see. He set both hands on the command rail. The cup of warm drink was still sitting there beside his hand, untouched, going cold, and I think he never drank from it again as long as he lived. "Stop," he said. Vorlon, mid-order, didn't hear him. "Wing reform on the upper axis, force it back into the—" "Stop," the captain said again, and this time the whole bridge heard it, and the whole bridge went still. "Recall the cutters," Captain Daimon Reth said. "All of them now." Vorlon turned. His gray undercolor had gone grayer. "Sir, we have lost 4. If we disengage now, those losses are for nothing. The escort is nearly dead. One more pass and it will take a 5th of ours with it," the captain said. "And a 6th. It is not trying to survive, tactical prime. Do you understand what I am telling you? It is not trying to win, and it is not trying to survive. There is no point at which it stops, because the thing that makes the rest of us stop has been removed from it. It will trade itself for our cutters until there are no more of either." And then he looked at the display, at the 11 slow haulers still crawling toward the jump point, still not yet safe. And then it will have done exactly what it set out to do. It will have made us spend the morning on it. It will have bought them the distance. He said it like a man reading the answer off the wall of a tomb. "It is using our own doctrine against us," he said, very quietly, almost to himself. "It found the one thing the correct distance cannot defend against. It found a thing that wants to be killed if killing it costs us enough. We have spent 9,000 years learning to fight people who want to live." He straightened up. He was, in that moment, the most magnificent and the most defeated thing I have ever seen. And they have been the same thing in him my whole life since. "Recall the cutters," he said a 3rd time. "Cease fire on the escort, hold our position and let the convoy run." The thing about giving an order to stop a battle is that the battle does not stop just because you said so. The captain said cease fire, and our guns went quiet, and the cutters began to peel away and reform on the recall beacon. And on the bridge of the unbending tide, 40 people let out a breath we'd been holding for what felt like a year, and was actually about 9 minutes. But the Saoirse didn't get the message. I mean that literally. We had cut our weapons, but we hadn't told it we'd cut our weapons, because in 9,000 years it had never once occurred to us that you might need to tell an enemy you've decided to let them live. Surrender came from below, always from the smaller thing to the larger. We had no protocol, not one, not in the entire doctrine library, for the larger thing offering quarter to the smaller. We didn't have the message. We didn't have the idea of the message. So from inside the Saoirse, what happened was this. The cutters that had been killing its friends suddenly turned and ran. And to a crew that had decided to die buying time, a fleeing enemy doesn't read as mercy. It reads as a trick. The Saoirse did the only thing its 19 people had left to do. It turned its scarred, leaking, half-dead nose toward the biggest target in the sky, toward us, toward the unbending tide itself, and it lit what was left of its drive, and it came. It came for the cruiser. I had it on my panel the whole way, and I have never been able to forget a single second of it. By then the Saoirse shouldn't have been able to move at all. I'm telling you that as a sensor adept, as a man who read the dark for a living, who knew to the decimal what that hull could and couldn't do. Its reactor was past failure. Half its mass was dark. The patch welds that had shown up as little scars on my readout that morning were gone, peeled away, the wounds underneath them open to space. By every number I trusted, it was a corpse that hadn't noticed yet. It accelerated anyway. The bridge saw it coming. Vorlon's hand went to the weapons board on pure reflex. 9,000 years of something is charging us. Kill it. And the captain put his own hand flat over Vorlon's and held it there. "No," Reth said. "Sir, it's a collision run. It means to ram us. The spinal lance will. It cannot hurt this ship, Tactical Prime, you know that. The math you love so much, do the math. It is dead and it does not have the mass. The captain's voice was so quiet now. It cannot hurt us. So we are not going to be the ones who kill it. Why? Vorlund said, and it came out of him almost as a plea, because the old tactician had hit the floor of his own understanding and there was nothing under it. Why does it matter? It is already. Because somebody should see it, the captain said. And that's what we did. The most powerful warship in the Spinward fleet, 40,000 crew, guns that could crack a moon, we held our position, and we lowered our weapons, and we watched a dying freight runner with 19 people in it charge us with everything it had left. It didn't reach us. Its reactor gave out about 400 links from our hull. I watched the light go out of it on my panel. Not an explosion, nothing so loud as that, just the slow blue spike of its drive guttering down to nothing, the way a held breath finally goes. It coasted the last of the distance, dark and silent and tumbling, the slide-in strike pilot's hands gone still on controls that no longer answered, and it passed us close enough that the optical feed picked it up directly, and for about 3 seconds the Saoirse filled the bridge's main display. I want to tell you what it looked like, the thing we had called junk that morning. It looked like something that had been hit by everything we had and was still, somehow, pointed at us, even dead, even tumbling. The last thing its pilot had done with the last of the thrusters was hold the nose on target, and the nose stayed on target as it drifted past, dark and broken and aimed, the way a thrown blade stays aimed even after the arm that threw it is gone. Nobody on the bridge spoke. 40 immortals, watching 19 mortals drift past dead, and not one of us could find a single word in 9,000 years of language that fit. It went past us. It went out into the dark on the far side, and behind it, while we sat there silent and ashamed and changed, the 11 haulers of the Brennan convoy reached the jump point, and one by one, fat and slow and full of children, they folded into the deep lanes and were gone. Safe. It had worked. The whole insane arithmetic of it had worked. 19 people had spent themselves down to nothing and bought a few thousand strangers the distance to live. And the most powerful ship in the fleet had not been able to stop them, because there is no weapon in any arsenal that fires the only round that would have worked, which is to make a human who has decided to stay decide instead to leave. There isn't one. We looked. Believe me, after that day the Dominion looked. The captain stood at the rail for a long time after the last hauler jumped, the cold cup of his drink still beside his hand. Then he did a thing that was not in any doctrine, a thing that I am fairly sure no Dominion commander had done in the entire recorded history of our people, a thing that the Admiralty later tried very hard to pretend had not happened. He opened a channel, a broadcast channel wide on the open frequency, the one anybody could hear. And he spoke to the Saoirse, to the dead ship, to the cloud of it and the 4 clouds of our own cutters, and the empty space where 19 people had been a few minutes ago. I have the recording. It is the only copy, he said. This is Daimon Reth, commanding the Dominion vessel Unbending Tide. I am 412 years old. I have fought in 11 campaigns, and I have never lost a ship until today, when I lost 4 to 19 of you. I do not know your names. I want that understood. I do not know a single one of your names, and that is my failure, not yours, because you knew exactly what we were, and we did not bother to know what you were, and that is the whole of what happened here today. He paused. The bridge did not breathe. We were taught that your short lives made you weak. We were taught that a thing which dies in 80 years cannot matter, cannot plan, cannot hold. We were wrong in a way I do not yet have the words for. You did not fear us because you have spent your entire existence being made by things far less merciful than we are, and we have spent hours forgetting that mercy and weakness are not the same. You were not weak. You were the strongest thing I have ever pointed a gun at, and I am ashamed that it took me 400 years and 4 ships to see it. Another pause, longer. The convoy is away. You did what you set out to do. You will not be remembered by us. Our records will call this a successful clearance because the people who write our records were not on this bridge and will not believe what was. But I was on this bridge, and I will remember you. As long as I live, which is a great deal longer than any of you got, I will remember the ship I could not stop. He closed the channel. And then Captain Daimon Reth, 4 times decorated, undefeated for 4 centuries, turned to his tactical prime and said, "Set course for the Admiralty. We are going to tell them what we learned. And then I am going to resign, because a commander who has understood what I understood today can no longer fight the war the Dominion wants to fight." You want to know what the panic was? The real one. The title of every telling of this story is about the Empire panicking, and people think it means the bridge that morning, those 9 minutes. It wasn't. The panic came after. The panic was what happened when Captain Reth's report reached the Admiralty, and the Admiralty did the math he made them do, and realized that everything they thought they knew about the recents was not just wrong but backwards, and that there were, by the recents' own broadcasts, which we'd never bothered to decode properly, a great many more of them than 19. The panic was the closed session that ran for 40 days. The panic was the doctrine library being pulled apart for the first time in 6,000 years, because the foundational assumption underneath all of it, the enemy wants to live, had been shown to have an exception. And an exception to a foundational assumption is not a footnote. It is a crack that runs all the way down. The panic was 100 client species, who had knelt to us for 9,000 years because kneeling was one of the only 2 moves, hearing the story, and it got out. It always gets out and beginning, very quietly in 10,000 small ways, to wonder about a 3rd move. The panic was the Vashtar Dominion looking at a galaxy it had been certain of for 9 millennia, and discovering that certainty was a thing you could lose in 9 minutes, to 19 people in a freight hauler, who didn't even have a proper warship. That can't be a human warship. Is it even possible? No, it couldn't be. It wasn't. That was the worst part. That was the part that broke us. It wasn't a warship. If it had been a warship, we could have understood it. A warship is a thing built to fight, and we knew how to fight things built to fight. But it was a cargo runner. It was somebody's freight business with 2 old guns bolted on. The schoolteacher, the weekend racing pilot, the cargo master. Ordinary people in an ordinary ship who became the most dangerous thing in the system, not because of what they had, but because of what they were willing to do with the nothing they had. We could have built 1,000 defenses against a human warship. There is no defense against a human who has decided. I am old now, older than Captain Reth was that morning, which is a strange thing to have outlived, since I was 19 and he was 400. He did resign. He went home to the Vashtar homeworld, and he did not fight again. And when people asked him why, he would only say that he had met the future once, on a clear morning at the edge of a quiet system, and it had been pointed directly at him, and he had not been able to stop it, and a man who has seen that has no business pretending he can still win. The Dominion does not call it a defeat. Officially, it never happened. Officially, it was a clearance, executed, convoy lost, minor friendly casualties, file closed. But every officer in the Spinward Fleet knows the real story, the way you know a thing your people don't say out loud. We tell it to the young ones the first time they laugh at a small contact. We tell it the way I'm telling it to you. We say, there was a ship once that we called junk that should not have been able to do a single thing it did. And it taught us the lesson our whole civilization had spent 9,000 years arranging not to learn. The lesson is this, and I'll give it to you the way the linguistics corps gave me their word for it, the word we didn't have. You can measure a people's weapons, and their tonnage, and their reactor output, and their hull integrity, every number perfectly. And you will still lose to them every time if you forget to measure the one thing that doesn't show up on any panel. The one thing they're terrible, beautiful, Murderous little homeworld spent 4 billion years teaching them and bred all the leaving and all the kneeling clean out of them. How much they are willing to lose. We never could read it, not with the finest instruments 9,000 years could build. I spent my whole life reading the dark, and I could tell you the mass of a thing, and its speed and its make, and whether it was running or aiming, and I could not once, not ever, read the only number that decided who lived. So this is the story, written down at last, by the one who saw it and not by the ones who file the records. There was a ship. We called it junk. It said no. And 9,000 years of yes has never been the same.